So, whenever you're doing a painting, whether it's watercolor, gouache, or probably any medium, you probably want to start off with some sort of sketch. And the only thing that's really important about this sketch is that you do it very, very lightly with very light pencil because watercolor and gouache are very thin paint and it's hard sometimes to cover over your pencil lines. So here I drew, it was actually a planter, um, and it's like a face, and then it has green plants coming out of it. It's something I had in my house, so I looked at it while I was drawing it. And what I want to show you right now is called shadow layer or dead layer. And what that is it's a layer of paint that you might put down in either a watercolor or gouache painting um, that gives some shadow. And then what you do is you let that layer dry. And later, maybe a few hours later or a little while later, you come back with another either shade or color and go over it. So I want to show you what that looks like. So for this particular one, I'm going to use gray because the statue itself was gray. But if you were going to be doing this on, let's say, a human face, you would definitely want to use either a brown or a tan as their shadow color. Gray probably wouldn't work very well, but because this was stone, I'm going to use gray for this demo. All right, so we have our shadow layer and it's completely dry. I've left it to dry overnight, so I'm sure that it's 100% dry. And what I wanted to show you is how I can now add another layer of color right on top of this very carefully, and you'll still see the shading through it. So the first thing you're going to want to do in this situation is figure out what color you want to do. So as I said earlier, this was stone, so it was kind of gray. So I would normally probably do another layer of gray or maybe a tan stone color, but for the purposes of this video, I want to show you that you really can do it with almost any color. So I'm going to go for a blue. I'm going to make a nice watery blue. I'm going to put a little bit of gray into it though, because I don't want it to be too blue. And you'll notice I'm using a pretty big brush for this because I know I want to get a pretty even wash of color over it. So I'm just grabbing a little bit of blue. All right, and then ideally you have a spot where you've been testing colors. So I'm just gonna lightly make sure that I like this shade. I might add a little more gray to it. Let's see. Yeah, that seems to be pretty good. So you'll notice too, I'm using this paint pretty thin, but you don't want to make any puddles. So you want to be careful that you don't have too much water. And then what I'm going to do is carefully and lightly go over. Now, if I were to make this too wet, it would start to pick up the paint that's already dry and underneath it. So I'm keeping it very light and very dry, but still wet enough to kind of flow. And that's a tricky consistency. So it's something you have to kind of test and figure out over time, which is why I recommend having a little area either right on your same piece of paper that you'll cut off later, or just another piece of the same exact paper so that you can test what things look like before you put them on your piece. Now I know under here, this was the bottom of the base, so it's pretty dark under there, so it's okay if I put a little extra blue over there. And up here in the head area, I'm going to want to pull out some highlights in a little bit. So I don't want to make it too dark or too wet. All right, maybe do a little bit more over here. So you'll notice I'm going very lightly because I can always add more, but I can't take any off. And also, I want to make sure I can still see all that beautiful shading work that I've already done. I don't want to cover that up. All right. So there you go. All right, so now that this is dry, you can see the extra blue on top. I think it looks good. So if I were to think that I needed a little more at this point, I could add another layer of the blue if I wanted. So another thing that is really cool about gouache in comparison to watercolor is that even if you get so it comes in two different versions. It comes as either a pan set like this or a set of tubes. However, even if you get the pan set, which is the one that I like because it just kind of has every color available to you, the white still always comes in a tube. And what's awesome about that is it keeps your white nice and clean, and your white is pretty strong. So if I wanted to add, let's say, little highlights to these circular areas, which were kind of like balls, I guess you could say. So they would have like a little bit of maybe a shine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a nice skinny brush, and I just took some of the white gouache right out of the tube there. And I'm not using that much water. I'm just kind of using it pretty dry out of the tube. And then, of course, testing right here to make sure it's what I want. And then I can come in and add little teeny highlights. And that just kind of brings your painting to the next level. When your thing has drawing, shading, highlight, and shadow, it's just even better than it would be without. And then if I wanted to, I could also add maybe a little highlight here on the tip of the nose. And notice how it just blends really nicely in with what I have already. I could add an extra highlight up here if I wanted, maybe a little bit on this bottom lip. And again, it's subtle, it's not overkill at all. And that's what you want with highlights.